Imagine you're trying to put out a fire. And you've been pouring water on this fire for years, decades, actually. You've spent billions of dollars on the water, the hose, the truck, the whole crew. But every time you look through the smoke, not only is the fire still burning, but it almost looks like someone is using your water to somehow fuel the flames.
That is a terrifying image, but unfortunately it's a pretty accurate metaphor for the dilemma we're discussing today.
Exactly. And that brings us to the Horn of Africa, specifically Somalia. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a fascinating and, frankly, pretty heavy document. It's titled, Senator Jim Risch Warns of U.S. Security Risks from Somalia.
And just to set the stakes here right off the bat, this isn't, a random press release from a backbencher or some think tank opinion piece. This is coming from Senator Jim Risch.
Right. Let's establish who that is for anyone who doesn't track Senate committee assignments for fun. Why does his name on a document matter so much?
Senator Risch is a senior Republican voice on foreign policy. He's the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Okay.
In Washington speak, that means when he talks about foreign aid and security policy, people listen. He has a significant say in where the money goes. He essentially helps control the purse strings for the State Department.
So when he says the current strategy is broken, it isn't just an opinion. It's a potential roadmap for a major policy shift.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the shift he's proposing is radical. It really challenges decades of diplomatic tradition.
We're talking about a move that could literally redraw the mental map of Africa that the U.S. State Department uses. So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack why this senior senator is calling for a hard-nosed, realist approach to Somalia.
Right.
We're going to look at the money, the corruption allegations, including a crazy story about stolen food, and this massive question of whether the U.S. should start ignoring the official map to find actual stability.
It really comes down to a clash between the way we want the world to look, idealism, and the way the world actually works on the ground, realism.
And Risch is arguing we've been too idealistic for too long.
And that it's becoming dangerous.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the money. Because usually when we talk about foreign aid, the assumption is we give money, it helps people, everyone feels good. But Risch is saying, not quite.
He's saying much more than not quite. He is issuing a stark warning. The core argument in the source material is that U.S. engagement in Somalia, and we're talking specifically about counterterrorism and humanitarian aid here, has become too open-ended.
Open-ended meaning? We just keep writing checks without checking the result, like a subscription service you forgot to cancel?
Essentially, yes, but with much, much higher stakes. Risch argues that aid must be strictly transactional. Now, that is a loaded word in politics.
Sounds a bit cold. Transactional, like buying a used car. I give you cash, you give me the title.
It does sound cold, but in the world of geopolitics, it means something very specific. It means that every dollar sent must align firmly with American national interests. It isn't just about benevolence or charity. Risch views aid as a strategic tool. And if you're using a tool, you need to know it's working. You need transparency, accountability, and measurable returns. If the government receiving the aid isn't delivering, the transaction stops.
And the warning here is that we aren't getting those returns.
Worse. The warning is that we might be funding the very instability we're trying to stop. Risch talks about systemic corruption. He's concerned that U.S. funds are falling into the hands of individuals who actually benefit from the chaos.
Wait, let's dig into that. So the idea is, if you're a corrupt actor in the region, you don't actually want the problem to be solved, because then the aid money stops flowing.
Exactly. It's the perverse incentive of the conflict economy. If your power and wealth come from managing the flow of aid during a crisis, deciding who gets food, who gets contracts, then peace is bad for business.
Stability dries up your revenue stream.
Precisely. Risch warns that unchecked aid can undermine our own security goals if it just feeds these corruption networks.
That is incredibly frustrating. It turns the whole concept of aid on its head, but it's also a bit abstract. Did the source give us something concrete? Because systemic corruption is a phrase politicians love to throw around.
Oh, there's a very concrete example. And this is where it gets really interesting and distinctively troubling. The source mentions a recent incident where the U.S. actually had to suspend portions of its aid to Somalia.
They actually turned off the tap.
They did, because of corruption allegations. But here's the kicker. Humanitarian assistance was only reinstated after the Somali government recovered misappropriated food stocks.
Whoa! Okay, let's pause on that. Recovered misappropriated food stocks. That is a very polite, diplomatic way of saying someone stole the food meant for starving people.
It is.
And the U.S. said, we aren't sending more until you get the stolen food back.
That is the reality. And Risch uses this to illustrate the tangible reality of what he calls mismanagement. It isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's physical resources food, supplies being siphoned off.
And when that happens, two things occur. The people who need it don't get it.
Right. And the people causing the problem get richer and more powerful.
It really paints a grim picture. It suggests that the government we are partnering with had to be, well, strong-armed into doing the right thing.
Exactly. And this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? The source mentions this is part of a wider, let's say, vibe shift under the Trump administration.
Right. The source explicitly connects Risch's comments to that broader shift.
It does. The administration has been very vocal about adopting a more interest-driven approach to foreign aid.
I remember reading that they halted cooperation with certain aid agencies.
Yes, and former President Trump has openly criticized how Somali officials and even the diaspora manage this aid. There is a deep skepticism there. They're insisting that assistance must clearly advance strategic objectives.
If it's just going into a black hole of corruption.
They're signaling they are willing to pull the plug.
So we have this backdrop of show me the results or show me the door, but the source material goes even deeper than just the money. It goes to the actual political structure of the country.
Right.
This is where we get into the One Somalia policy.
This is the fascinating part. This is where we move from economics to cartography to map making.
Okay, lay it out for us. What is the One Somalia policy?
Simply put, it's the State Department's long-standing approach of dealing exclusively with the federal government of Somalia, which is based in Mogadishu.
The one in the capital.
Exactly. The policy says Mogadishu is the capital, the federal government represents the whole country, and that is who we talk to, period.
That sounds, well, normal. Like we talk to Paris for France, we talk to Tokyo for Japan. Why is that controversial?
In theory, it is standard diplomacy. But in practice, the One Somalia framework assumes a unity that Risch argues just doesn't exist on the ground. He's calling this policy outdated.
That is a big word in diplomacy. Calling a long-standing policy outdated is basically fighting words.
It is. He argues that this framework no longer reflects the political or security realities. It is a polite fiction. And this is where he introduces the pivot point. Somaliland.
Somaliland. Okay, so for the listener who might be picturing the Horn of Africa, Somaliland is in the north, right?
Correct. And it's crucial to understand the distinction Risch is making here. He distinguishes Somaliland from the chaotic south. While the south, governed by Mogadishu, struggles with al-Shabaab, instability, and all the corruption we just discussed.
He describes Somaliland differently.
Very differently. He calls it a stable and democratic partner.
Stable and democratic. Those are two words we haven't heard used to describe the Mogadishu situation in this document.
Not at all. Somaliland declared independence back in 1991.
Right.
They have their own currency, their own police force, their own elections. But because of the One Somalia policy, the U.S. technically pretends they're just a province of Mogadishu.
And here's the bombshell. Risch is advocating for changing that.
He is advocating for direct engagement with Somaliland.
Bypassing Mogadishu.
Bypassing the center. He says the U.S. should explore all possible mutually beneficial relationships. He's effectively saying, why are we ignoring the one part of the region that is actually working just because our map says it's part of the part that isn't?
That is a huge deal. I mean, if the U.S. starts talking directly to Somaliland, isn't that a slap in the face to the federal government in Mogadishu?
It's more than a slap. It's a vote of no confidence. It challenges the very principle of Somali unity. It suggests that Washington is losing faith in the Mogadishu-based federal project's ability to actually govern.
So if you start making side deals with Somaliland,
you are implicitly admitting that Mogadishu doesn't control the country.
It feels like breaking up with someone but not telling them, just starting to date their roommate instead.
That is actually a startlingly accurate analogy. And the source mentions that Somaliland isn't exactly waiting around for permission, is it?
No, they aren't. Somaliland has been campaigning for international recognition for a long time. The source says this campaign is gaining momentum. They cite increased regional engagement and specifically mention recognition by Israel.
Oh, wow. So other countries are already starting to redraw that map.
Exactly. And Risch is suggesting the U.S. shouldn't be left behind clinging to an old framework. He's positioning Somaliland as a more reliable ally for U.S. security interests.
It makes a certain kind of sense. If you want to stop terrorism and you want to secure the Red Sea, Why not work with a partner that has shown it can govern itself?
It seems so logical when you put it like that, but I imagine the diplomatic fallout would be massive. Why haven't we done this before?
The fear has always been balkanization. The State Department worries that if you recognize Somaliland, then every other separatist group in Africa will say, hey, what about us?
It opens a Pandora's box.
Right. But Risch seems to think the risk of not changing is now greater. He's arguing that the box is already open and we're just refusing to look inside.
So we have the money problem and we have the map problem. Section 3 of our breakdown here is really about the philosophy shift. The source calls it a move from idealistic state building to a hard-nosed, realist approach.
Hard-nosed is the key phrase there. Idealistic state building is the idea that if we just pour enough money and support into the central government, eventually they'll become a strong, unified democracy. That's been the dream.
And the reality?
The reality, according to Risch, is that we've spent decades doing that, and we are still dealing with stolen foods and terrorism. So the realist approach says, stop trying to build the nation you want and start dealing with the actors that actually exist.
So what does this look like in practice? If this roadmap becomes policy, what changes tomorrow?
The source breaks it down into 4 potential consequences. First, tighter conditions.
The strings attached?
Heavy strings. Aid to the federal government won't just be a blank check. It will likely come with specific benchmarks. If you don't meet them, you don't get paid.
Which connects right back to that transactional idea.
Second is scrutiny. Accountability becomes the watchword. We're talking about audits, tracking mechanisms. No more trust but verify. It's more like verify than maybe trust.
Then the third one.
This is the big one we touched on. Bilateral security. The U.S. might start working directly with Somaliland on security matters. Imagine U.S. military or intelligence cooperating directly with Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland, without asking Mogadishu for permission.
That changes the whole power dynamic in the region. It basically treats them as a sovereign state in everything but name.
Completely. And that leads to the 4th consequence, reassessment. It's a questioning of the very foundation of Somali unity. It's the U.S. admitting that one Somalia might be a fiction that is costing us too much to maintain.
The source mentions that security threats stem from chaos. That feels like the bottom line for Risch.
It is. He argues that failing to pivot puts the U.S. at risk. Not just financial loss, which is bad enough, but security breaches. If the chaos in the South continues to fester because we're propping up a corrupt system, that chaos eventually exports itself.
Terror groups like Al-Shabaab don't stay within borders.
They don't. So by trying to be nice and support the official government, we might actually be making ourselves less safe.
That is the core of the realist argument. It isn't about being nice, it's about being effective. Risch is saying we need to choose our friends based on measurable returns, not diplomatic tradition.
And if Somaliland offers a return on investment, stability, democracy, partnership, and Mogadishu offers corruption and chaos, the realist choice is obvious.
It's a fascinating look at how foreign policy is actually made. We tend to think of it as these high-minded ideals, but often it comes down to, is this working? No. Okay, then let's stop doing it.
And it highlights how significant a single senator's voice can be when they are in a position of power. Risch is signaling that the patience of the U.S. government, or at least a very powerful faction of it, is running out.
So let's recap what we've learned today. We have Senator Jim Risch, a heavyweight in foreign policy, sounding the alarm. He's saying the billions we're spending in Somalia need to be checked because of systemic corruption, exemplified by that crazy story of the government having to recover stolen food stocks before getting more aid.
Right, the feed the corruption cycle. It's a devastating critique of the status quo.
And then the proposed solution isn't just audit the books, it is change the map. He's calling for an end to the one Somalia policy and advocating for direct engagement with Somaliland,
which he calls a stable democratic partner. It aligns with the broader Trump administration shift toward transactional, interest-based foreign policy.
It's a move away from let's build a nation to let's secure our interests with whoever can help us do it.
That's it.
So what here feels massive? If the U.S. actually makes this pivot, it isn't just about the Horn of Africa.
No, it's a signal to the whole world. It tells other nations that the U.S. is willing to bypass central governments if they aren't delivering. It tells aspiring regions like Somaliland that there is a path to recognition if they can prove they're stable and democratic.
It could fundamentally reshape the geopolitical landscape.
Absolutely. If the U.S. shifts, other countries, European nations, other African nations might feel empowered to follow suit.
It's like pulling a loose thread on a sweater. You think you're just fixing one little part, but the whole thing might unravel or be knitted back together into something completely different.
A completely different shape. And that's what's so compelling about this source. It is a snapshot of a potential turning point.
Hmm.
We might look back at this warning from Senator Risch as the moment the U.S. decided to stop looking at the map as it was and start dealing with the map as it is.
That is a powerful thought to leave us with. We often cling to these official versions of reality, official borders, official governments, because they feel safe, they're orderly. But when the reality on the ground is messy, chaotic, and corrupt, sticking to the official version can actually be the most dangerous move of all.
It raises a provocative question for everyone listening, really, not just about Somalia, but about the world. If a policy like One Somalia looks perfect on a map but fails completely on the ground, at what point does sticking to the map become an act of denial?
And how many other outdated frameworks are we holding on to in global politics just because we're afraid to redraw the lines? Something to mull over.
Indeed.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for exploring the messy reality of the Horn of Africa with us.
Until next time.